We've all been sold a dream that in our golden years we'll be roaming around Tenerife or Lanzarote, drinking pina coladas, playing bingo and generally enjoying the spoils of decades of work. But you'll probably never be able to retire. And that might sound sensationalist or a clickbait title. I promise it isn't. As a general rule, I try to stay on the nice side of personal finance. All of my content is written and presented to help motivate you on your journey. But the reality is that for many of us, the path in life that we're on right this second won't afford your retirement. And if it does, it will come with the biggest pay cut of your career. For most people, a normal life looks something like this. You go to school, possibly university, you get a job, climb up that career ladder, and well, we put away some money for our future so that one day, decades from now, we can sit back and enjoy a relaxing and comfortable retirement. For most of us, this is normal. It's also what society says is normal because, well, that's the path that most of us are on. But what if I was here to tell you that now and in the future, this plan just won't cut it, and that many of you will not be able to retire at all? And if you do, it will be considerably less comfortable than you think. The thing is that nobody wants to hear this. And I've spoken to thousands of people over the last year who are unaware of this, or worse, they choose to ignore it altogether. Because, well, every single one of us has been told that saving in your workplace pension is enough, or that you're doing well because you aren't tens of thousands of pounds in credit card debt. And I will admit that if that is the case, you're doing better than some. But being completely honest and completely frank, that's the bare minimum of wealth building, and you deserve to know the truth. And I don't say this lightly, because while many factors you can control, there are others that are completely out of your influence, and those are the ones that will keep you working until your 70s, your 80s or your 90s. I'm talking about housing, the stock market, a generational wealth divide that's only getting wider, as well as government policy that's entirely focused on keeping you working longer. So if you don't want to keep working until you're 90, let's look at the factors affecting each and every one of us and how we can combat them head on. And first, we're going to look at those factors we can control. According to the Financial Conduct Authority, over a third of us, 34% of adults, had either no savings or less than £1,000 in a savings account. And this figure increases for those of us who are aged 18 to 24, where over 47% have little or no savings at all. That's nearly 23 million people in the UK who right this second would be quickly in financial difficulty if they lost their primary source of income. Horrible. The chances are that many of you aren't saving enough, but I'll agree that enough is entirely subjective. We are all at different stages of life and we each have a unique set of circumstances affecting our savings rate, and that's okay. But for this video, we're talking about retirement, because someday in the future, I imagine that many of us would like to down tools and enjoy our remaining years, and hopefully without financial worry. The reality is that many of us here in the UK are starting from zero, or very close to it when it comes to our savings. And the older you are, the harder it will be to catch up. But let me explain. Generally speaking, you'll hear people recommend that 10 to 15% of your income should be saved and invested for a comfortable retirement. And for most people, this is, well, it is a decent starting point. The good news is that a lot of the heavy lifting will be done by your workplace pension. Right now, a minimum of 8% combined between your contributions and those made by your employer must be made. Yet I know from personal experience that many employees do not contribute anything more than this, if at all, and many employers are unable or unwilling to contribute anything more than the minimum requirements. While 8% is a start, it's nowhere near enough. Let's assume that you're starting to save for your retirement today, and your investments earn 5% after inflation during your saving years. In our retirement then, we also plan to draw down using the 4% safe withdrawal rate, and I'll talk about that later. Now, these are the assumptions that you're going to hear touted all over the internet by personal finance experts across the world. And for this explanation, let's say I agree with them. I don't though. If we save and invest 10% of our income each year, it would then take us 51 years to replace our current income with our investments. If you're 20 years old, you'll be 71 before you can replace your income. If you're starting at 40, saving 10% will have you working until your 90s. And of course, the simple answer is just to save more money. And this will help you reduce the amount of time it takes to be able to replace your income and retire. But by saving even 20% each month, you'd still have to wait 37 years. So if you're 30 years of age right this second, you'd still be in your late 60s. And I know from speaking to a lot of people that many of us have aspirations to retire in our late 50s or early 60s. So if you're in your 40s like me, you'll need to be saving at least 50% of your income to achieve this. Let me just repeat that, because if you're in your 40s this second, starting from zero, you need to start saving 50% of your income to retire in your late 50s, your early 60s. Now, the second factor that we have to talk about is debt. Because according to the Money Charity, people in the UK owed 1,846.5 billion, that's a lot of money, at the end of October 2023. Now, this is up 22.5 billion from the year before, which is an extra £423 per adult over the course of the last year. The average total debt per household, including mortgages, was around £65,700. And an increase in household debt is ultimately going to result in the requirement for more income, less spending, or more commonly, that any of our savings get sacrificed. But to give ourselves any chance at retiring one day, we need to avoid debt at all costs. Yet if you look around you, you'll see bigger homes, luxury holidays, and fancy cars. And you're going to ask yourself how they can afford it. The truth is that many people can't. Where our investments work for us, our debt is working against us, keeping us poor and eating away at any chance of wealth building at all. And I can't stress this enough. Stay out of debt at all costs. And if you're in debt, pay this down as quickly as possible. Now, your savings rate and the levels of debt that you have are only one part of the story. The returns you get from your investments are another altogether. And the shocking news is that many workplace pensions aren't even returning 5% after inflation. In fact, after fees and expenses, I had one friend who earned less than 1% growth in his workplace pension before inflation over the last 15 years. In real terms, the money that he had invested in his workplace pension had decreased significantly. By default though, many workplace pensions are prudent, and your savings are invested across a broad mix of stocks and bonds. Depending how you answered the questions posed when it was set up, your investments could be heavily weighted in bonds, which often have a lower return than stocks. Now, investments can and will go up and down on any given day, but the younger you are, the longer you have to ride the waves up and ride them down. And generally speaking, we would hope that having stocks in our investment portfolio would increase at a faster rate than bonds over the long term. But being heavily weighted in bonds from a young age, you are decreasing the overall potential of your investments when they should be working hardest for you. And what I'm about to say might sound common knowledge, but did you know you can change your stocks and bond allocation in your workplace pension? Well, you can change how you invest your money at any given time. And while I would say don't do this flippantly, I urge you that if you do nothing else after watching this video, that you open up your workplace pension platform and truly understand how your money is being invested. Ask yourself these questions. Are you happy with your mix of investments? Do you understand them? And what has been the return on your investments over the length of time that you've had your money invested? And if you continued on this path, would you be able to live off 4% of the total investment amount when you come to retire? And if you answered no to any of those, you have questions to ask. Because nobody cares about your money like you do, and you can no longer afford to leave your retirement to chance. Understanding your pension and how your money is invested is key to this. And some of you will be happy with the results that you've seen, and you may choose to just increase your pension contributions so that your savings rate has increased. And well, that's okay. But others may be unhappy with the results that they've seen. And if this is the case, you could possibly look at how you can optimize your investments within your workplace pension, or you could start to research investments outside of it. And a good starting point is a stocks and shares ISA, among other things. The final part of anyone's retirement planning process is our withdrawal rate in retirement. It's how much money we can take out from our retirement pot every single year without the money ever running out. And the 4% rule is touted worldwide as gospel. And being frank, I talked about it early on and I said it accepted, but the truth is it's risky as hell. The 4% rule was founded on the Trinity study that took place back in 1998 in the United States. It shows that with a withdrawal rate of 4%, you could sustain a lifestyle for 30 years or more. And well, that just sounds brilliant, doesn't it? It's everything you need tied up in this nice little beautiful bow. Except there's a few things we have to consider. It was entirely focused on the US stock market, not the UK, where most of my viewers are based, and the returns here are vastly different. It focused on the years 1926 to 1995, which is absolutely no indication of future performance, and it was based on a portfolio of 100% stocks, which we know, as I've just mentioned, a lot of us have bonds in our portfolio. And similar studies in the UK by the Morningstar suggest that a safe withdrawal rate in the UK is between 2.5 and 3%. This massively changes how much we might need for retirement, and not for the better. And if we assume that we love the 4%, we'd need 25 times our annual spending invested so that we can withdraw that 4% each year. But at 3%, we'd need 33 times our annual spending, and at 2.5%, we'd need 40 times our annual spending invested. And what that means is that if you spent £20,000 a year, you'd need £500,000 at 4%, £660,000 at 3%, and £800,000 saved and invested at 2.5% withdrawal rate so that your money never runs out. As you can see, these values vary massively across each of the withdrawal rates. And the truth is that nobody has any idea whatsoever what the future holds. So if you have to make a decision, and you have to do that now, it needs to be something that you're comfortable with. In case you're wondering, I work to around 2.75% withdrawal rate myself, but some people would say I'm too cautious. To this point, I've introduced the factors that we are in control of. I've talked about savings rate, I've talked about debt, I've talked about where we put our money, and also I've talked about the withdrawal rate that will start to protect ourselves, well, from ourselves more than anything else. Yet, why is it that many of us aren't saving and investing enough? And the answer is that a lot of people that you know are living in the moment without any consideration for the future. For some, this is a considered choice. For others, it's a lack of knowledge, which I hope that this video goes some way to changing. However, even if we change attitudes and we focus on those things that we can control and influence, I'm about to explain that why this too may not even be enough. And you're probably wondering when the happy stories are going to come. Sadly, today there are none.
Not on my watch!
Almost every day there's a news article about housing affordability. This is nothing new, but as one of the largest individual purchases that any of us will make, getting on the housing ladder is a major challenge, and it's only getting harder. Consider your parents or your grandparents just for a moment. At what age did they buy their first home? And if they're still around, ask them how much they paid. With the average house price of a home in 1980 being under £20,000, you can be forgiven for believing that homes were more affordable. Well, because they were. If we look at the income to house price ratio, according to research by the House Buyer Bureau, the cost of a typical UK home in 1980 was 4.2 times the average earnings, and in the last year, 2023, the cost of a typical UK home has over doubled to 8.8 times average earnings. You're not imagining it. It is harder today to buy a home than it has ever been. And for those of us who can get on the property ladder, we're buying smaller homes. Not because we want a smaller property, but because that's all we can afford. And this further adds to the problem, because older generations are now sitting on larger properties worth a far greater sum, and the capital growth in these bigger homes often grows faster, putting those smaller homeowners further behind. The generational wealth divide is only getting bigger. Not only that, in 1977, the median age of a first-time buyer was 27, whereas in 2023, this had risen to 32. We're leaving it longer to buy a home, either spending those 5 extra years renting and throwing our money away, or living with our parents. And if we consider this further, it becomes a much bigger issue. Your home is likely the largest single asset that you own. And if you're buying this later, paying more for it, and the cost of interest is higher than it has ever been, and the house price is actually appreciating less than every other home around you, then the divide in wealth between us and these older generations will only continue to grow. And that's the good news for those of you who can get on the property market. Because owning your own property and paying it off over the length of the time of your mortgage will one day leave you with an asset that you own outright. So for those of you who one day eventually want to retire, a paid off home alongside even the most modest of pensions will go a long way. Now, some of you will be planning to afford your retirement without the ownership of a home, and I get that. Our penchant for home ownership here in the UK and Ireland isn't shared worldwide, not even in Europe, where 30% live in rented housing as compared to 19% of all households here. Maybe you plan to fund your retirement through investments in your workplace pensions, your ISAs, and ultimately the stock market. Well, let me poo all over that as well. I have already talked about investing in your workplace pension and why you might not get the returns that you expect from this. The fees that you pay and your level of risk are factors that you can control. But what about those that are completely beyond us? In every other video, you're going to hear me declare that the way to build wealth is to invest as much as you can. Because historically, investing has returned decent results on the money that we put to work for us. But in reality, we can only get an idea of what would have worked in the past. We expect that as we invest, our capital will compound and grow, and this compound growth builds our wealth slowly but surely over time. But all of this is just an assumption. It assumes that our investments will continue to grow over time. Some years they'll grow lots, others they'll be a little, and other years they'll be in decline in the price that we've paid. Yet the only factor we know to be true is the past results are of no indication of future returns, something that every single one of us, myself included, easily forgets. And as John Bogle says in his book Enough, my concern is that too many of us make the implicit assumption that the stock market history repeats itself when we know deep down that the only valid prism through which to view the market's future is the one that takes into account not history but the sources of stock returns. And if you think about that, future stock returns depend on millions of factors outside of our control, and there is a significant chance that our investments provide less of a return than we hope, expect, or need. And there is another problem that we need to address, and that's inflation. We've just come through a period of significant inflation in the Western world, and this is where many assets of many industries increased significantly. In the UK, inflation reached a peak of 11% in 2022. But inflation does not affect us all equally. For many, inflationary pressures affected our pockets significantly more than the reported 11%. Because, well, if we look at food inflation, for example, the price of coffee increased through inflationary pressures at over 16.5%. And the British Retail Consortium said that soaring coffee costs were part of the reason why food price inflation grew by 15.4% in May 2023. Food is more expensive today than it has ever been, and many of us reduced our bills by buying less or switching to cheaper alternative brands. In doing so, we could relatively keep our expenses down. But for those on the lowest incomes who were already buying these brands or these own brands, there is often little opportunity to switch, and it becomes a case of, well, doing without. And this is just one case of inflationary pressures that affect many of our lives that are completely out of our control. If you have a mortgage, for example, your interest rate has likely jumped significantly. The Bank of England uses interest rates to slow down spending. That's the truth. They actively try to make you and I poorer to stop us spending money. And the renters among us don't get relief either. As with increased interest rates, landlords have been putting up rents at record speed to match or indeed exceed the increased interest rates. And when the rates come down, don't expect the rents to follow. Inflation eats away at our affordability. And unless your wages are increasing at or above the rate of inflation, you're worse off today than you were this time last year. Yet, for most people who already hold investments, stocks getting more expensive is a good thing. Stocks generally benefit from inflation and their value often increases. But for those starting, or those that are younger, buying stocks become significantly more expensive, possibly out of the reach of many, and because they're at a higher price already, the returns could be less. The state pension is funded by workers, and it's funded by those who pay national insurance contributions. Yet it's absolutely no secret that there are increasing financial challenges due to the nation living longer in their retirement years. To combat this directly, the government is increasing the state pension age, and it has done so since 2010. Currently, both men and women can claim their state pension from the age of 66, but for those who were born after the 5th of April 1960, this will rise to 67 in 2028. It'll eventually rise to 68, affecting those who were born after April 1977. And I guarantee you that for those of you who are in your 20s or your 30s now, that we'll see this rising to the age of 69 or 70 by the time you come to retiring. And this is a problem, because a higher state pension age exposes more individuals to the much less generous working age benefit system for longer. If you want to retire comfortably before this, you're going to have to fund it yourself. Look, I appreciate that this has been a tough watch for many, but just because it's uncomfortable doesn't make it false. You will need to work harder than those before you, and you will likely need to save and invest more of your money, and you're going to need to do this for longer. And yet I'd argue that it's never been easier to make money or to build wealth. Of course, I'll be covering this here on my channel, so make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.